Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Sheldon. I'm a body image eating disorder advocate. I'm a Braun model as well as a NEDA ambassador. Lynn from Rosewood Treatment Centers here in Santa Monica asked me to come speak and share a bit about my story with y'all. I was diagnosed with binge eating disorder back in 2015. I'm 30 years old now, so I was about 27, I think then. It took me a while to get diagnosed with BED. I don't know if it's because a lot of people aren't familiar with what binge eating disorder is, or if there's a stigma that surrounds, the stigma that surrounds men struggling with eating disorders. If my doctors never thought maybe that they should even question me, because I had been going to therapy for most of my life for other reasons than my eating habits, and for some reason they never came up in a conversation. Maybe it's because of my height, maybe it's because of my size, I don't really know. And when I was diagnosed with BED, my life changed completely. I always knew that there was something off, but I never knew exactly what it was. And what I mean by that is that, when I was growing up, I had a larger than life appetite. My mom actually used to joke about how Ryan has the hungry man appetite, he's a growing boy. The reality is that was not the case. As I grew a little older, I realized that my behaviors surrounding food were interesting. I would go to a friend's place for dinner freshman year of college, and then after everybody finished eating, I would go into the bathroom and I would call in a to-go order from the restaurant downstairs and leave early just to go pick it up and eat. The reality is that I wasn't necessarily hungry when I would eat, because BED isn't just about being hungry all the time. Actually, it's the complete opposite. BED is a lot about the obsessions that you have surrounding food. I would, go to work on a Monday, planning for my binge that would be happening over that weekend. I would send my friend who also struggles with BED a couple different recipe options and say, what should we cook? And she would say, I don't know. And I said, that's the perfect answer ever, because we're gonna make all 5 of these items. So I would go on Amazon and I would order all of this equipment, like a deep fryer for an example, and have everything shipped to my house by Friday. And then we would cook and we would binge essentially. And this one time I ordered a deep fryer to make one of the recipes, and after we made the food, we binged, and I felt so horrible about myself that I threw the deep fryer away immediately, and I went into this dark spiral right after. People don't realize that when you're binging, right after you binge, a lot of times you feel worthless. You feel like, I don't deserve anybody. I feel like all hope is lost. I'm not worthy. People also have this misconception that people with BED are overweight or that they're lazy. The reality is that BED isn't just about, again, eating the food. It's about the obsessive thoughts. I would wake up at 2 a.m. thinking about food. I would walk to the refrigerator just to open the door, just to look at the food. And I wouldn't necessarily eat it, but I would look and I would go back to bed. I think a huge important thing here is that there is a component to BED that is restricting. So I would go on a binge and then I would restrict for a day or two after, which is a huge part of binge eating disorder for me. When I was diagnosed in 2015, my life changed. First of all, my doctor wasn't really sure what BED was. In fact, one of the most interesting things is that I brought it to him because my friend mentioned something called binge eating disorder. She's a good friend of mine. She said, Ryan, have you ever heard of this? And I was like, no. And I looked it up and I was like, I feel like I'm struggling with this. I took it to my therapist, who I'd been seeing for about 6 years at this time. And believe it or not, never once has my eating habits ever come up in a therapy session. I don't know if it's because I'm a guy and men aren't supposed to get eating disorders, or if it's because of my height. It just was never part of our conversation. So when I brought it to him, he was pretty skeptical because he never really even heard of BED, because up until I think it was about 2013, the DSM-5 classified binge eating disorder as its own separate eating disorder, not under endorse. So he did his part, and he, helped me and kind of made a recovery path for me. Immediately, I was relieved because I knew that something was going on with me, but I wasn't sure what it was. And now there was a name for it. So I went on Google and I typed in men with eating disorders. I didn't really find anything. I typed in binge eating disorder. I didn't really find much. So that's kind of when I was like, you know what, I really want to kind of share my journey. And I don't know what my journey looks like at this point. I just know that I'm struggling really badly, and I bet there's other people out there that are struggling, and there's no advice. Like, where can I find advice from other people like me that are struggling? So that's when I decided to create my blog, Mr. Confessions, and my Instagram, Binge Eater Confessions, and I kind of started to share my journey. I wasn't sure how people were going to receive it, but you know, it actually went over really well. And what the most interesting thing is that I have a lot of women that write to me saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. This really helps me understand that men also struggle, which is great because women are healing from hearing a man's struggle and journey. But the other interesting thing is so many men have reached out to me. There was a guy that reached out to me. He was 31 years old at the time, 32 maybe. And he said, I was just diagnosed with bulimia. And I told my mom, and she said, that's impossible. Only women get bulimia. So I know it sounds crazy, but this is the world that we're living in. 30 million Americans are currently struggling or will struggle with an eating disorder at some point in their life, and 10 million of those are men. Okay, so let's do the math. That's 1/3 of the people diagnosed with eating disorders are men. That number is huge, and also severely underrepresented because men don't necessarily get diagnosed with eating disorders because A, they might not think that there's a problem. In my example, I didn't know that there was something wrong with me. Subconsciously, maybe I knew something was off, but I really thought that every single person's relationship with food was very similar to my relationship with food. I didn't realize that people thought differently. So that's huge, that men are struggling, and why aren't men talking about it? So that's kind of what started this whole journey for me. And then I wanted to figure out how I can share more of my story. So along with the Instagram and my website, I was like, truthfully, I also struggle with BDD, body dysmorphia disorder, and that probably has plagued me more than even a lot of aspects of my eating disorder. For me, they go hand in hand, but for a lot of people, you know, just because you have an eating disorder doesn't mean that you have body dysmorphia disorder or body image issues, and just because you have BDD doesn't necessarily mean you have an eating disorder. In my case, I happen to have both. But I wanted to really celebrate my body. I was in a relationship where I would get body shamed. Ryan, you don't have a six-pack, and the last guy I was with did have a six-pack. I didn't realize at the time that I was being treated poorly. That was a huge struggle for me. I thought that it was normal. I thought that was a sign of love, somebody talking down to me. And then when I got out of that relationship, I realized that, wow, I really can't handle this anymore. And I wanted to then, once I started going through treatment for it, I wanted to celebrate my body. And that's when I decided to try to get into brawn modeling. And for those of you that don't know what brawn modeling is, it's the equivalent, I guess you could say, of a curvy model, which is a curvy woman. And for a brawn man, it's just a bigger guy. So I went on and I applied for a bunch of agencies, and I got offers. And then I was on my way to New York to stand in front of the camera and get paid to celebrate myself. And there was really no better feeling, but I would be lying if I said there's sometimes I stand in front of the camera and I'm like, am I just the token fat guy here? So it's interesting being in the space that I'm in, what I do for work, you know, advocating for body image and for eating disorders, and how much I'm surrounding myself, and that's become my world, but also I'm in recovery from that. So it's a very interesting balance to try to balance both parts of it. But I'm happy to sit here today to tell you that recovery is possible. You know, they always say like recovery isn't linear, and it gets easier. Sure, whatever, they can say whatever they want. I just think that the reality is that, you know, it's gonna suck at times. It really is gonna suck at times, but the truth is that you're gonna get through it, and you will come out on the other side. And I think that that is the biggest key. I think that people just telling you it's okay, it's great, everything's gonna be so amazing, like, that's not necessarily true. But the reality is that I am in the best place I've ever been in my entire life because of recovery. I have made so many friends, and I consider some of them my family now because of my journey through recovery. I've made it my life's work to get out there and to share my story and to hopefully inspire other people to take that chance on yourself. You know, I often get asked the question, like, how would you speak to a guy? Like, how are men even knowing about this, or whatever it may be? And I think that for men, the best piece of advice I can give you is, if you think there's a problem, do research, because unfortunately, a lot of times you go to doctors and the doctors are like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. But I think that like you're so worth that, and I don't think that, you know, struggling with any emotional mental health issue defines your masculinity. Unfortunately, in the society we live in now, a lot of men think that just because they're sharing their story, it defines them, and it makes them less of a man. I'm here to tell you that I am 100% man, and it makes you human, really, because, you know, eating disorders are a mental health issue, and I think education behind them is key. They do not discriminate against orientation, gender, age, religion, ethnicity, nothing. They can affect anyone, and I think that that is a key takeaway here is education. Thank you all for listening to a bit of my story. I have a whole lot more of that, which you can find on my blog at mrconfessions.com and my Instagram, Binge Eater Confessions. Hope to see you there. Send me a message. I will respond. Thanks.